Hello, everyone. Good day.
Hey, Hita. Hey, MC.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Mary Claire. Welcome, everyone, to Unite Behind the Science, a special side event during the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy. My name is Hita Lakhani, and I serve as the focal point from the Global South for YOUNGO, which is the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Today, I'm joined by my counterpart, Mary Claire Graf, YOUNGO's focal point from the Global North, and Matt Tranchin, President for March for Science. Hi, Mary Claire. Hi, Matt.
Hello, good to see you all. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Hey, Hita. Hey, MC. So glad to be with you both. And for folks tuning in, I just want to set the stage and context for our two incredible co-moderators who are joining us. What you probably know is that Hita and MC are the global focal points for YOUNGO, which is the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. What you might not know is their particular personal circumstance of how they're both joining us today. Hita is in the wee hours of the AM on Friday because she's based in India and has agreed to participate and join us. And MC is having a big birthday celebration tomorrow, but her family is over tonight. And so she has carved out time to be with us. So really, thank you both for the generosity of your time to be here and kick off this event. We're super excited for it. So look, let's jump in. I know we're excited to cover a few topics today, and specifically, I know what's of real importance to YOUNGO and March for Science is the Science Not Silence campaign, which of course is the movement to finally and formally ensure that the IPCC 1.5 degree special report, which was released at the end of 2018 and then subsequently blocked from being formally welcomed at COP24 and COP25, is formally welcomed and adopted at COP26 coming up in November in Glasgow. But before we jump into that, of course, last week concluded the UNFCCC sessions from the subsidiary bodies. Now that's a mouthful. And for those who aren't super engaged in the insider baseball politics of global climate action, it's a really big deal. Would love for the two of you to really explain the significance of we'll call them the SBs for short. Yeah, either of you jump in, but can you kind of explain both the context of the SBs, the function they're supposed to serve, and maybe what makes this year so unique?
Yeah, I can kick us off and then Hita, you can add on. So while we all talk about the World Climate Conference always happening at the end of the year, normally the in-between meeting, the subsidy body meeting or the SB meeting is not getting so much of attention, but they're very, very important because this is where the work gets done. This is where all the countries are meeting and kind of setting progress and working to make then the decisions by the end of the year. So it's kind of a working session. And normally it's always happening at the headquarters in Bonn in Germany, always around like May, June, and it's normally for 2 weeks. But last year, of course, due to the pandemic, we didn't have this SB session, we didn't have the World Climate Conference. And this year, it was really like, we really need to make progress. We cannot just come all to Glasgow and then are there kind of lost what happened for the last 2 years and no one could really make progress. So they decided to do it virtually. And because of course, virtually it can be very exhausting and all the different time zones as we've already been talking about, Matt, right? So it was expanded and it was held during 3 weeks, virtually, fully virtually. So everyone, 196 countries participated virtually, also the observers from all the countries like Hita, myself, and hundreds of young people and civil society. And we all joined through a Teams platform. And maybe Hita, you can say how this was going and what was very unique about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as Mary Claire said, the context was basically to ensure that there is work going on between the last session, which ended in 2019 at the end of the year, and the next one, which will happen now after 2 years, this November. It was interesting because this was the first time the UNFCCC has ever had a negotiation session online. And because it was over 196 countries, which means that every single party or member of the UNFCCC was present there, they had to adjust also to time zones from across the world. So these 3 weeks were broken into 3 slots, basically catering to 3 major regions of the world, trying to ensure that it's not just one part of the world that is suffering indefinitely for the duration of the session. But that also made it very exhausting for everyone because every week the time changed, and because of time zone differences, we missed out on weekends. Work just went on throughout 3 weeks. I think it was also very interesting because negotiators also had a lot of technical difficulties. You could clearly see, and this was somehow across regions, right? It's not just developed or developing countries. We really saw it across regions where people were losing internet connection. Sometimes there's a mic unmuting issue. Sometimes people just had joining issues where the link doesn't function or there were technical glitches. Yeah, so it was super interesting.
Well, and you turned me on to one of the more entertaining Twitter accounts, the SB 2021 blooper account, which basically chronicled the technical challenges and missteps throughout this entire process, which, if anything, could get people more involved and engaged in these high-level negotiations about the future of our planet. I think adding comedy into the mix has proven very successful. And so I'm hopeful that that also generated a lot of interest and following, because, look, as you all noted, these conversations traditionally have served to essentially frame the understanding and secure the outcomes of the COPs, the Conference of Parties, the annual UN climate change conferences that are the most important and influential global climate convening in the world. This year, of course, unique in several ways. You talked about how it was probably the most inclusive subsidiary body, SBs, that have ever happened, just by virtue of them being virtual, and therefore more people could participate. But it was also the first time that the SBs haven't been binding. And that makes for this year's COP26, which will be happening in Glasgow, probably the most wild card COP we've had to date. There's still a great deal of uncertainty of what can be accomplished and what will be accomplished. Looking back at what concluded, were there any notable outcomes to highlight?
Well, we made progress, right? As you mentioned, I mean, the parties really stated because of the issues of connectivity that there no decision is taken, but we could advance in certain aspects around, for example, action for climate empowerment, but also when it comes to some very, very technical things of how we are measuring greenhouse gases, but also on the agriculture part. So there was progress done. And I think it was also just good for the people to reconvene and get back to business and also see the amount of work left, right? To kind of get a little bit scared and hopefully get back to work. But yeah, I mean, there is a huge chunk left for us to work on throughout the next 5 months.
Well, I guess, so YOUNGO, of course, is the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC. It has a literal seat at the table to be a part of these international climate change negotiations. As part of that, and in that capacity, at the conclusion of the SBs, you all released a statement, a call to action. What were those calls to action, and what is it that you highlighted?
Yeah, I think throughout, whenever we've got the opportunity, and especially at the closing, we have been mentioning the Science Not Silence campaign. This is something that we truly believe in, and it's extremely important. As young people, we're literally talking about our future and the future of generations to come. So this is something that we have been highlighting. We've had a call to action for parties to come and join and sign on and welcome the IPCC 1.5 degrees report. But additionally, we've also spoken about a declaration that we have along with UNICEF and the Children Environmental Rights Initiative, which is on a rights-based approach to how children, youth, and climate action should be taken into consideration. We've also focused on meaningful youth engagement, in addition to everything else that we wanted to focus on substantive negotiation texts. So I think it has been, in that sense, we've tried to cram in everything that we could in the few minutes that we had, and try and make our call to action extremely strong, in the hope that parties will listen and will act from now on to Glasgow.
And I know, coming up this August 12th for International Youth Day, there will be a virtual COI Conference of Youth where members of YOUNGO will be coming together with world leaders to really build momentum around the signature campaigns and priorities of YOUNGO. So I know that this presented a huge momentum generation as we get closer and closer to COP. But for the purposes of this event, it sounds like a perfect segue to the Science Not Silence campaign. So, we talked about it at the very beginning of the forum, but let's dive a little deeper. The IPCC 1.5 degree report, which for folks tuning in, the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is the official UN body of climate science and scientists. Following the Paris Agreement, when there was debate really about how to define success, with every country coming together and putting forth their climate goals. The language of the Paris Agreement was a collective pursuit to keeping global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. Of course, at the same time, there was a movement led by small islands developing states, SIDS, that really called for that threshold to be 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so following the Paris Agreement, led by AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, our partners in the Science Not Silence campaign, the IPCC was asked to commission a report that really showed the world not only the effects and impacts of a 1.5 degree world on our planet, but really what was required in order to keep global warming below that threshold. And this was the report, of course, that came out in October of 2018 that created international headlines. We have 12 years to turn the world around. It essentially demonstrated how much more needed to be done beyond the initial goals and climate pledges made by every country. And there was a great deal of concern, but also, I think, momentum of building people around this idea that ambition had to be increased. And then, of course, the following month at COP24 in Poland, the 1.5 degree report was actually blocked from being formally welcomed by the UNFCCC, by a few countries that had their own agenda and viewed climate action, I think, as a threat to potentially their stated policy goals. So I guess, what I'd love to hear from you all, being a part of YOUNGO, I'm curious what your unique perspective is, having been a part of these conversations, seeing the 1.5 degree report up close and personally blocked by climate negotiators. Can you talk about how that went down and what it felt like in the moment as it was playing out? Hita, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it has definitely been quite eye-opening in that sense to see actual geopolitical relationships play out over the course of the negotiations. You see countries' positions, you see where they stand, and at the same time, you see who's supporting whom in these rooms, right? And you know who the big players are. You know that if one country decides to go on the right path in that sense and actually make ambitious decisions in the negotiations, people will follow. But unfortunately, that really doesn't happen. And in one of those negotiating rooms, when I was there, it was quite a ton of events where we went and we spoke to the negotiators after the negotiation ended, and we really told them, and they said, yeah, don't worry, tomorrow's session it's going to be different. And it was the other way around. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see, and it was also very shocking because this is not what we would expect of our leaders. This is not what we would expect when countries are making decisions, not just for themselves, but for generations to come.
Yeah, maybe just additionally that very often they are referring to it, you know. So in the opening statement, they are like mentioning it and throughout the negotiations, but they're mentioning it, but not taking it into consideration when it comes to the real policy. And I think this is really, really dangerous, because with this, they're giving some sense of urgency, they're giving some sense of, oh, we're actually acting according to the science. But they're not doing so, only in the speeches, and what we really need are the actions. And the actions need to be based on the science, not only the talks. So yeah, we really hope that with the campaign, we can amplify that it needs to be like in a formal process welcome, and not just only be in the nice speeches in the beginning and the end.
Well, and what I love about the Science Not Silence campaign is it's forcing governments to go on the record of where they stand on this really important issue. You know, just to kind of paint the picture. So following COP24, of course, it was the 1.5 degree report was blocked. But really what spurred the impetus for this campaign was the knowledge that this report was again going to be blocked because of the SBs, the subsidiary body sessions that took place the following year to really set the stage for what COP25 was going to be. So as organizers focused on this issue, we knew for months that again, this report was going to be blocked. And so the idea was, how can we use COP25, which was the last annual UN climate change conference that's taken place. It was originally to be held in Chile and then moved to Madrid. But the idea was, how can we use COP25 to formally launch this campaign, to draw that line in the sand and force governments to step up? And you know, fortunately, later on in this event, we're going to be joined by Ambassador Feturi from the Independent State of Samoa, who actually helped launch this campaign with the formal support from the Independent State of Samoa, which will be exciting. But I think what I'm so proud of, and honestly, it's a credit to YOUNGO and AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, is how much this campaign has grown since then. You know, right now, 19 countries have formally joined the campaign. And, you know, the truth is, in order for the 1.5 degree report to be formally welcomed at COP26, we are going to need unanimous consent. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but looking at the trajectory of the campaign and the momentum I think we have behind us, I'm optimistic. You know, Marie-Claire, looking at COP26 and just coming out of the SBs, what gives you hope? You know, I mean, you spend a lot of time having very difficult conversations and reconciling what world leaders are saying and what's actually happening. And I know a lot of that can be extremely disheartening. But I want to focus on the other side of the climate action coin. What gives you hope as we head into COP26?
I think definitely it's good that we had the opportunity to meet, right? It's definitely good that we had a formal setting to get together and advance work, not only because of what we talked about, but kind of bringing back also on a national level, also like kind of bringing it back into the brains of the people that we are here, the multilateral system is still here, climate change is still going to be a threat, right? Because ultimately what we need is prepared countries, and the countries are not just going out of the blue going to be prepared. And I think this is kind of also a pressure moment where it's like suddenly, oh, we expect you to come forward with your action plan. We are coming forward with your updated national determined contributions. We expect you to be there, prepared in negotiation, not just come like, sorry guys, we had the pandemic and that's why we couldn't prepare, right? So I think this gives me hope that we had this opportunity and all the countries joined this platform and these virtual negotiations. Also, as you mentioned, we had a lot of young people who could also join, maybe not as meaningfully as we normally participate, but also this was a great learning. So hopefully the young people are better prepared, because they already saw how like this very unique space is working and how tough these negotiations can be, how draining it can be, but also that actually if we are like really pressuring and on the point actually something could happen, and that some of the negotiators also like listen to young people and taking us serious. So there is definitely there's definitely hope, but we need to accelerate the actions, and I think this is what we're also doing with the Silence Not Science campaign, right?
Absolutely. Hita, what gives you hope?
I think just the fact that there are so many people now mobilizing, young, but also everyone across age groups, so many people calling out what it is and saying it as it is, realizing that this is really not something we can just keep talking about for months and months anymore. Um, the fact that we have people putting pressure on whether it's national governments, whether it's international processes, also all the other young people in YOUNGO, right? Following negotiations, doing very technical stuff, looking at text, looking at where we can input into it, trying to talk to negotiators, trying to have bilaterals, planning for COP26, looking at what are the turning points, and even beyond, actually, not just COP26, we have youth within YOUNGO that are looking at COP27 and beyond. I think this is what gives me hope, just to see that there is so much momentum, there is movement. And no matter what, while what happens at Glasgow is extremely important, I think the youth are definitely not going to let it just sit there and, just take what comes. We're definitely going to push for a better outcome.
Yeah, no, I love that. And frankly, everyone has seen that. I mean, what gives me hope as as a young father, I've got two little kids, is seeing what the next generation has done and accomplished over just the last few years. I mean, pre-pandemic, looking at the global marches and sustained protests that are resulting in tangible impact and differences. You look at what's happening with youth demanding a seat at the table. Obviously, MC, what you're seeing in Switzerland, major strides in terms of just youth representation, and even what's happened during the pandemic, how young people have begun to use the digital assets and resources to organize in ways that have never happened before. The level of adapting, organizing skills, and really using it to put pressure in unique ways, not just on governments but corporations. It's we're in a new era, and that gives me a lot of hope. But look, with that, perfect time to segue to our next segment. I'm going to take a back seat and let the two of you co-moderate this next segment with a really special guest who's taken time out of their day to join us. Hita, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think I'm going to take it away first. It's my pleasure to bring on Sena Sukyo, who serves as the chair of the US Student Energy Consortium, and he is also a representative of the SDG 7 youth constituency. The SDG 7 is on energy. Sena, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Right. Thank you, MC, for giving the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. Right. So I guess I'll give a brief introduction about myself, and then we could begin. Will that work? Okay.
Sure.
So my name's Sena, as I was introduced. So I'm an Indonesian student at Yale University. This is my first year, so still navigating academic institutions and the formalities of getting a degree. So I'm representing SDG 7 Youth Constituency today and the US Student Energy Consortium. But at Yale, I also take on responsibility as the energy liaison. So I coordinate the student engagement process at Yale. And my work has been focused on just getting students more engaged with the larger decision-making of the university, and also being involved as a extracurricular club president, and just getting students to buy into the idea that changes need to change, and we need to change now. And so that's essentially what I've been doing.
Well, that's a lot of stuff, Sana. That's very impressive. And for everyone tuning in, let's begin with learning a little bit more about the US Student Energy Consortium. How does it contribute to the youth-led climate action that we're seeing built around the world?
Right. So the consortium itself is essentially a student-led, student-run group that acts as an informal forum for dialogue and collaboration between the student leaders in various universities. So it's essentially a club for clubs, and we just get together not to talk about the issues at hand, but to talk about how we can best communicate these issues to the larger public, and getting a broader base of support for our initiative. And so it's the central idea was we came up with it sometime in December. last December, we were discussing how can we possibly integrate the students and the various student groups into the larger US ecosystem for climate change and energy. And so we came up with the idea. No one's actually done this before, and it was a new idea to bring everyone together to work on putting pressure into the government, so influencing business leaders to actually change their energy use patterns and also invest in clean energy. And so we thought that, okay, that's a good starting point. And so in the end, Yale, UCLA, and Duke took charge, and now we're at 25 members representing around 3,500 students, give or take, right? And so essentially how it contributes to the larger youth-led climate action is we see it as a micro habitat or a micro ecosystem of diversity, right? We have a lot of groups focused on energy research, some interested in policy, some others in finance, some others are, just interested to know about innovations, but they're not really trying to like actively pressure anyone, right? And so different levels of engagement, different interests, different commitments, and so it gives us a good blueprint essentially on how to engage with the various different groups and apply like ideas that we have, ideas that work can be applied to a global scale, right? It's which essentially is kind of represented by our micro habitat here. And so it can also be a good test site for ideas that I plan on using essentially the ideas developed by the SDG 7 Youth Constituency and translating it into tangible action in the US and North America.
Yeah, thanks so much for explaining. And yeah, now you already kind of made the shift. Can you also explain a little bit what the SDG 7 Youth Constituency is doing, and yeah, how you're involved in this global movement? So basically, that's making the transition from the US to the global level.
Right. Yes. So the SDG 7 Youth Constituency is the formal engagement mechanism for youth members or young people to engage in UN and UN related processes that kind of touch on energy. Right. So we act as the youth engagement focal point for energy focused processes in multilateral and multi-dialogue stakeholder discussions. And so the idea would be that this is the only, I guess this is the largest mechanism for engagement, right? Formal engagement for members of youth is still somewhat rare because a lot of the opportunities tend to look for qualifications like formal degrees, years of experience. And so this traditionally kind of reduces the number of youths engaged, right? Just because a lot of youth participants do not have these formal qualifications. And so I believe this is one of the rarer opportunities that amplify youth voices. And so I think as the youth constituency is doing an important role of making sure that the youth stay engaged within the larger dialogue. So my role, so I'm quite recently involved with the constituency, but I will be the regional focal point for North America in the coming year. So my plan is to get more American institutions engaged with the global movement towards sustainable energy and energy access for all, just because over the last 4 years under a certain administration, there were less engagements with the rest of the world when it comes to climate commitments. And so a lot of universities kind of also the momentum died down for a bit, but now as a new administration is in office and the US already rejoined the Paris Agreement, right? The momentum is building back, and so we are starting to see a lot more engagement, and we plan on capitalizing on that engagement.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect segue to my next question. As we approach COP26, there is a lot of concern about the state of the Paris Agreement. Most countries have inadequate NDCs. Many of them are not on track to achieving even those inadequate goals. As you see it, what role do young people play in impacting and influencing governments from across the world?
Right. So I guess the main idea would be that right now, young people are starting to get better at organizing themselves and diversifying their efforts, right? So I'm going to use a soccer analogy, football analogy for the rest of the world. Essentially, because it's Euro season, so the idea would be like in a soccer team, there's like defenders, midfielders, forwards with different roles, right? Scoring goals, getting the ball from the back to the front, things like that. And so the same can be applied to the youth movement, right? There are people who like to engage directly in protest. There are youth members who like to, oratory speeches, right, in public institutions. There's some who enjoy lobbying, some who like to do the research, right? And I feel like there's a good mix, and there are already many ways and increasingly large amounts of opportunities for engagement, right? And these different engagement opportunities allow for more engagement by people who may not be interested in one form of engagement, but may be interested by something else that they are skilled at or they're really interested in. And so I believe that that actually creates an advantage, because now wherever you look, whichever sector, there is someone out there pushing for sustainability, climate change mitigation strategies, energy reduction. So basically, wherever you look, the government can't really wherever they make action, they need to take into account that there will be someone there who will be trying to hold them accountable to their sustainability goals. So I think that will be a big role moving forward in influencing governments. And I also believe that in the US in particular, the elections are now youth play a large part, because there are a lot of digital campaigning, right? Especially with the pandemic and everything, people shifted to the digital sphere of engagement. And since the youth members are kind of the digital natives, and we spend more time on the internet than any other like age category, it becomes an automatic like added value, right? Like these politicians are trying to engage youth constituents to help them promote their online image. And also the young voters bloc is starting to grow bigger. And so these variety of factors, I believe, was a contributing factor to President Biden's like election, and also his 2035 zero pollution energy sector goals and 2050 net zero goals. So I think there's the youth are playing a okay role in influencing the leaders.
Yeah, thanks so much, Senna. You partially already answered my last question to you. Also, like we have been talking about hope, I think it's very important to talk about hope. So when it comes to climate action and the state of the world we are in, right? What gives you hope?
Okay, so I think what gives me most hope is like what you both have mentioned earlier on, is the momentum, right? Like it's building, and it's there to stay, right? More and more people are getting engaged, and it's not a one summer thing where people come and then people protest one time over the summer and then they forget about it once the academic term begins, right? So as the momentum becomes more sustained, it gives me a lot of hope, because progress is made when something is sustained, right? Not like short bursts. So it's like a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think a lot of people are starting to get the idea. And so I'm really excited about moving forward. I'm also excited about the digital revolution. The pandemic kind of sped this revolution up. Like you said, a lot of platforms are now digital, and since we are digital natives, we will be able to contribute greatly to innovation and moving forward. And so more companies are realizing this, more government leaders are realizing this. And so we have more youth inclusion in recent dialogue than ever before. Like 10 years ago, if we were to attend a UN conference, I don't think it will be opened by a youth advocate or something like that. But we've come a long way from there, and now the youth has a seat in the table. And I look forward to what we can do with that voice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senna, for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Matt, who will conclude the event with an important conversation with our Science Not Silence partners from the Independent State of Samoa. Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Hita. Thank you, MC. MC, have a great early birthday party. Hita, please go to sleep. I know it's super late, and really appreciate you both joining and co-moderating today's side event at the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy. So joining me for the final segment of our side events, Unite Behind the Science, I am joined by Ambassador Feturi from the Independent State of Samoa, and Nick Davis, CEO of Grid Market. Ambassador Feturi, Nick, it is great to have you both join us, my friends. I do need to add, it's obviously a privilege having you both here, but also a pleasure because you two are actually good friends of mine. We three have formed a unique partnership over the years to make a meaningful difference in the fight, not just with climate action, but climate solutions. And really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this event. So thank you both for being here. So look, to kick things off, Ambassador Feturi, of course, you served as the permanent representative to the United Nations on behalf of the Independent State of Samoa for a decade plus. You are now the ambassador in Fiji, which for those who are aware of the geopolitical significance of that, Fiji is the most important political relationship for the Independent State of Samoa in the region. And, really you have been at the forefront of leading the diplomatic effort to put climate action really front and center on global stages around the world. So when we talk about the Paris Agreement and the nationally determined contributions made by governments as part of the Paris Agreement, HITA and MC noted that most governments have put forth inadequate climate goals. And even those countries that have put forth inadequate goals are actually not even on track to achieving them. Not the case with Samoa. Samoa put forth their NDC as being 100% renewable energy by 2025. So I guess I'd love your perspective on why you believe it was important for the Independent State of Samoa to have such an ambitious climate goal, especially considering that Samoa, along with every other small developing state around the world, is responsible for such a negligible global carbon footprint.
Well, thank you, Matt. Before I respond to your question, can I just place on record my deepest appreciation to our youth colleagues who have just completed I think their dialogue was very empowering, very liberating, and also it was full of positivity. So keep on keeping on. In response to your question, Matt, I think basically Samoa wanted to make a statement. You see, by design and by choice, Samoa is a small island developing state on the front line of the impacts of climate change. Reverse that. So by choice and not by design, Samoa wanted to be at the front line in terms of being ambitious in shouldering its share of the global responsibility and be part of the solution. The small island developing states challenges in terms of vulnerability and in terms of being at the front line of the impacts of climate change, that's a matter of UN record, and people can recite that. So for us, the time for apportioning blame is over. Charity starts at home, and we have to put our own house in order first before we start lecturing to others on how to live their lives. So hopefully for us, if we are doing something right, some countries will try and follow our example. I think the other thing too, the other part of the statement also is that we want to utilize what nature had abundantly blessed Samoa with all year round. And that is sunlight, and still more sunlight. What does that mean? That is a priceless natural asset that we can bring to the negotiating table so that we don't feel disadvantaged? Because too often we're always saying, as small island developing states, we don't have natural resources. Therefore, we are at the mercy of sometimes of whoever we negotiate with. But for us, we say, hey, there is plentiful supply of sunlight. We are ocean locked. How can we utilize these natural resources so that it can benefit us and hopefully assist in terms of our contribution, as being part of the solution to the impacts of climate change? And I think, it's a fact that the seats are on the front lines on the climate crisis. So I think it is imperative that we also lead by example.
Yeah, I love that. And lead you have. It's a great opportunity to bring Nick into this conversation. So to give kind of the context behind Nick Davis and Grid Market is an artificial intelligence company based in New York City that spun out of the Hurricane Sandy task force. Essentially in the wake of that storm, when the city of New York had lost power for weeks at a time, really was tasked with figuring out how to utilize data to essentially optimize and accelerate New York's transition to not just renewable energy, but resilient energy infrastructure as well. And since then, Nick's company has gone on to work with governments around the world to essentially do just that, help them utilize their data to achieve their climate goals. So Nick, setting the stage, we of course worked together as part of the Island Resilience Partnership. The Island Resilience Partnership really has worked with Grid Market and the Independent State of Samoa to create a pretty unique partnership that has found a way to utilize the government's data and at no cost to the government, help them better understand how they can optimize their national energy transition and accelerate that transition so that they can hit their incredibly ambitious nationally determined contribution goal of 100% renewable energy by 2025. I believe right now, Samoa is about 45% renewable energy. So look, there are many challenges facing countries when it comes to achieving climate mitigation and adaptation goals. Understanding how to use data is key to that. Can you talk about how Grid Market empowers governments to not only develop their national project-based energy plans, but, and this is, I think, what makes Grid Market so unique, not just help governments create plans, but actually convert those plans into actionable projects with secured financing.
Absolutely. And thanks, Matt. And thanks, of course, to the youth leaders as well. And of course, Ambassador Feturi, great to be on the call with you. And, I guess for a little context and background into the platform, we're a technology company. And at the end of the day, it's the will of the people and it's the political will in countries that gets things done. It's the commitment and the ability to stand behind those commitments that empowers companies like mine to help out and to assist in these transitions. And when you look at a country like Samoa, the reality is the abundance of sunlight, the abundance of some of those core resources that can be used. The only constraint that you really that you find is the size and scale that often blocks investors and outside capital markets from participating and really looking at it as a big opportunity to drive change. So the purpose of our platform is really to look out across every single parcel of land, every single property, every single network, every single piece of the utility, every element of electricity or transportation demand for energy, and optimize that approach on a building by building, block by block, parcel by parcel, even bus by bus basis to optimize energy across an entire country. And what we find is, a lot of organizations out there really want to start small. A lot of NGOs are focused on doing demonstration projects, doing, a few hundred kilowatts at a school or doing a mini grid somewhere. And these are all valuable, but the time for pilot projects and the time for tests is over. And if you look at places across the Pacific, you really see for lack of a better word, I'll say you see graveyards of old systems and solutions that were left there and are unattended to. There wasn't the appropriate level of capacity building. There weren't structures in place that made sure equipment was operated appropriately and maintained. And what we found again is that if you really look at every single resource that a country has, you can create a much bigger and bigger and bigger opportunity that attracts external capital. It attracts some of the biggest investors, the biggest technology providers, those that are willing to invest in training local capacity and making sure that utilities can manage and operate their own systems, and really turning those small opportunities into big opportunities on the world stage. And when we look at what to optimize, what we often see for the private sector is private sector companies come in and they try to find the most economically beneficial low-hanging fruit in a country. Maybe they want to do one big centralized solar and battery storage installation serving the main population center or cities. And what they leave behind are all of the other regions, off-island opportunities, other folks that desperately need access to clean, affordable power. So again, we look to achieve economies of scale, incorporate everyone we can in this mix, and really attract the level of investment and technology from inside and outside that really allows the optimized and perfect plan to come to fruition. And we digitize that what's typically a pretty manual and engineering heavy process, make it all cloud-based and make it very accessible to international investment and international contribution, and really try to make it as exciting as possible for, again, the global community to participate and assist these very ambitious places to achieve sustainability goals, economic goals, and grid stability goals as well.
And so, Nick, you're working on two fronts, right? You're working on an accelerated timeline, because as you noted, the issue of the climate crisis is only getting worse, and time is the one thing we truly don't have. We have technology, we have resources, so working on an accelerated timeline, and then of course an optimized approach, not just because as you noted, a lot of the big energy companies out there, they're driven by profit, as understandable. But the challenge with that, when governments work with some of these energy companies to provide a major solar installation in their capital, which is going to net the biggest return for that energy company, one of the sacrifices through that is it leaves a number of people behind, whether it's rural areas, outlying islands, in the case of small island developing states. And so your approach, Grid Market's approach, is not only addressing that accelerated timeline, but with its optimized approach, it's providing a level of service and reliability and price point for everyone that it's working with in that country, but also it's achieving the lowest price. And I feel like that's something that has to be driven home. It's finding a way to get energy companies that otherwise would want to generate as much profit for themselves as possible, as companies do, but really forcing them to do projects that provide the greatest benefit for countries and their citizens at the lowest price possible. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Cost should be one of the largest drivers, because that allows economies to grow. It allows new industries to come in and operate on a clean power grid. And that scale drives grid stability. What we found is a lot of these experimental pilot projects actually create a severe lack of stability in electric grids. And it becomes more expensive to go that last mile to 100% renewable and beyond. So it becomes very important to really look at this and calculate this for the full opportunity it is, and phase it out in an appropriate fashion, again, rather than dabbling, which many are inclined to do. So it really kind of takes the leadership of a country like Samoa to come in and show the rest of the world how possible this is.
So Ambassador Feturi, want a great segue back to you. Our partnership with the Island Resilience Partnership, Grid Market, Independent State of Samoa, it was forged at the Samoa Pathway in a regional summit that was held in Apia at the end of 2018. For those who are tuning in, the Samoa Pathway was launched in 2014 in Apia. It brought together the heads of state and political leadership of nearly every small island developing state, island government in the world. and really created a framework built on principles and priorities for countries in the front lines of the climate crisis to achieve its sustainability goals. So, the fact that our partnership was really forged during the Samoa Pathway Summit, can you talk about those principles of the Samoa Pathway and how you believe that this partnership that we've formed really embodies those priorities?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the Samoa Pathway is grounded on the importance of genuine and durable partnerships, where genuine partners will help and assist you if they can, and durable partners will be with you in both your highs and lows, no matter what. And durable partners also, even if they are not in the same room with you, the knowledge that they are your partners sometimes allows you to take a leap of faith, which under normal circumstances you wouldn't normally do. So that's the importance of, that's the overarching theme, and that's the Samoa Pathway is grounded on the importance of partnerships. Now, I think in the specific context of small island developing states, the Samoa Pathway was a joint commitment from every small island developing state to collectively pursue sustainability goals, but more importantly, to try and support each other. Now, in terms of our own specific partnership with Grid Market and also with the Island Resilience Partnership, it also embraces the foundational principle of leaving no one behind. And I think this is, in terms of our project, it's not just focused on the capital, Apia, or the most populous areas. Rather, it is a true national energy transition that will benefit the entire country. Also, I think the nature of our partnership is to ensure that the best practices, as we just heard from Nick, and lessons learned from our experience will be used to inform other nations' pursuit of climate goals as part of the Island Resilience Partnership. So I think for us, sometimes you always want to be at the front line, but sometimes it's better to be at the back because you learn from the challenges of those before you. So hopefully what Samoa is doing will also inform decisions by other small island developing states.
Yeah.
That when there is a will, there is a way.
Well, and that's, at the heart of the Samoa Pathway. It's this idea that it's finding what not just works, but what is scalable. And so as governments continue to collaborate, finding ways that we can take those partnerships that are achieving tangible results and giving them the support that they need, so that we can find ways to replicate and build upon that meaningful progress is, I know, at the heart of the work that we're all doing. Well, look, Nick, I at this point, I know we had talked about going into a demo, which I still want to do, but kind of building off Ambassador Feturi's genuine, durable partnerships, being at the heart of the Samoa Pathway and our partnership. What better test than a global pandemic to really put that, to challenge that very nature of our partnership? Of course, look, the pandemic turned the world upside down. Part of the consequences were international lockdowns, the inability to really travel anywhere safely. And of course, this happened right when Samoa and Grid Market had released the RFP for what Samoa's national energy transition would be. Typically, what would be involved in that would be the leading energy companies and financial institutions around the world who were actively bidding on this project in a transparent way to drive down the price, to actually travel to Samoa and participate in Grid Market's process. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen. So how did Grid Market and EPC, the utility in Samoa, how did it evolve in the face of unprecedented historic circumstances?
This was already quite an innovative and unprecedented project. And of course, the pandemic forced us to innovate even more, but hopefully the lessons from this innovation will allow us to accelerate energy transformations in other countries as well. But particularly in Samoa, we were really fortunate to just have an incredible partner in the government and also the Electric Power Corporation, the utility. And we were able to put our heads together and think of ways to even further digitize a very manual engineering-driven process. It's one thing to get data scientists and other folks excited about digital transformation and hosting very manual processes in a cloud-based and digital fashion. It's another thing to do so with very traditional engineers who are very focused on what they can see and what they can touch and what they can evaluate. So we ended up embarking on a really interesting journey using a lot of the digital technologies of the day. We were leveraging everything from drone-based technology to leading cloud-based software and engineering design software to really create and collect every data point that typically an engineer would verify on site in a very highly accurate manner. So accurate, in fact, that throughout the procurement, we were able to mobilize dozens of competing IPPs to participate in this project with enough data to ultimately secure 9-figure US dollar investments that represent really a huge amount of Samoan GDP. So what that means is we managed to get the biggest engineering firms and IPP firms and investors and energy companies and technology providers in the world to not only pay attention, but put their own investments at stake without ever setting foot in Samoa. And that'll change. They'll go, and we're eager for them to actually get on island and on site, just like we're eager to go as well. But it should just be such a good signal for the world that Samoa has pioneered, that there are no excuses here. Whether you are a small island developing state, whether there is a pandemic and a travel ban, these projects can move. There's no excuse to not move. So to just see the sheer willpower and innovation being driven by some of the most vulnerable countries in the climate process, or in the climate fight, really just should inspire everyone to get off the couch, or at least sit on the couch using the digital tools of the day to solve some of these problems. Because if we could do it in the worst parts of this pandemic and secure this kind of investment and secure these technologies and secure this interest, if Samoa could train up fleets of drone providers to completely digitize their grid, it's a signal that the rest of the world really needs to get in step and move. So, I think Senna also mentioned before some of the next generation and the digital capacity that everyone has. And again, there's no excuse for the powers that be to not be moving and innovating now. And we've really proven it this year.
Yeah, I love that. Well, look, at this point, Nick, I'd love if you can just give a demo of the grid market platform, as it's really worked with Samoa.
Okay. So I'll keep this relatively brief just because, of course, there are more interesting conversations to be had than looking at the screen and some of the technologies here. But, just on kind of the surface level and looking at the potential as we kind of look across renewable energy and distributed energy and microgrid potential across the whole world. What we've done here on our platform is pre-assessed around 350 million global properties for renewable energy. We've looked at the cost centers. We've looked at every single property in a particular place. And it allows us to, for instance, sorry, my computer's going a little slowly right now with the zoom on. It allows us to really go anywhere in the world, starting with our partners in Samoa and just building out an optimized energy plan for every single property. And every blue dot here represents a discrete property that's primed for resiliency, for solar, for batteries, for other optimized technologies. They constitute load centers, and everyone here has a profile in order to basically show the optimized amount of energy, the load profiles, the performance for each of these properties, so we can best figure out how to serve this with the newest energy technologies and the cleanest energy technologies of the day. So when we drill down from the thousands of properties that represent, the subset of opportunities that make this a really great investment opportunity for technologies of the day, we can drill down into one, for instance, which is a hospital in the capital, Apia here. And we can just with the click of a button, start to ascertain the appropriate sizing for battery storage and solar systems to create resiliency and to create the optimal energy solutions for this one facility. Building performance, sorry.
No, so Nick, I just want to say, like, with the hospital being an example, this is, of course, hospitals being critical infrastructure, right? And in the face of especially a storm coming through or a natural disaster, hospitals, one of the priority infrastructure opportunities, you want to make sure the lights stay on and the power is engaged. So, this is really looking at that using, billions of data points, better understanding really what is the precise, not just renewable energy project, but the microgrid, the resilience project that is required. And that makes the most sense given the energy costs, energy use, the potential based on the surface area of the rooftop. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And really understanding the value, the opportunity, the environmental benefits, the carbon reduction, the resilience requirements for every property allows us to create the optimized mix of bigger centralized installations, whether it be solar, wind, geothermal, other technologies, but also the needs at these critical sites, making sure that there's resilient infrastructure on a site-by-site basis at hospitals, schools, other things that happen in subsequent phases. So, I think it's absolutely critical to get this in-depth knowledge for every parcel. So, typically how things worked in the past in the Pacific is when you look at distributed energy, you'd have a donor country or an organization come in and pledge just to do solar at the hospital. So this $1.1 million US project might be a $300,000 donation for a small solar project that would ultimately maybe be decommissioned or go or stop producing electricity because an inverter was out. So you can imagine that by looking at 1,000 opportunities across this country, you create something that's really exciting, that encourages folks to train local capacity, that makes sure that investors take care of these systems and make sure that the environmental benefits are there, that the cost benefits are there, that you're achieving economies of scale. Just like one country can't save the world from climate change, it can only lead. One building can't save an entire country from high electricity costs and a destabilized grid. You have to use the full power of the economy and the full power of that country in order to create and generate the best opportunity for technology deployment, in order to stabilize the grid, in order to maximize cost reduction. So, that's one of the main functions of the platform. And I won't waste too much more time showing you guys these things. But again, what I'm really showing is just very in-depth analytics that allow us to really engage the technologies of the day, the investors of the day, and what we use to digitize what's traditionally an incredibly engineering and analytics heavy process that takes years to actualize. And here we can make things happen a lot faster, a lot more reliably, and leveraging a lot of data.
Very cool. Very cool. And this is, upon signing a MOU with governments, that really begins the data sharing process, right? That allows you to develop these plans. I know Grid Markets platform, you're able to scrape the internet of all things to generate as many data points as possible. But really, it's working hand in hand with governments, right?
That's absolutely right.
So, Ambassador, I'd love to note, of course, as I said at the very beginning of the forum, you helped launch the Science Not Silence campaign in Madrid at COP25 with March for Science and the Island Resilience Partnership. Since then, the Alliance of Small Island States, YOUNGO, have really joined as organizing partners, and this campaign has taken off, grown beyond Samoa's leadership to now 19 countries who are formally on board. As Samoa finds itself on track to achieving its ambitious NDCs and ahead of schedule, I might add, could you talk about the global importance of the IPCC 1.5 degree report that has been blocked at COP24 and COP25, and why it would be so meaningful for this report to be formally welcomed at COP26?
Well, I think when I was approached to be part of the side event in Spain, I readily volunteered to reply. because I also wanted to make another statement. And the statement was, you know, all these years since I've been saying there is such a thing as climate change. Our well-resourced partners say, give us the science. So the science has spoken, and now some of them are, they've been selective in which part of science to accept and which part of science not to. So I think that was the statement we wanted to make. And if you look at it, a lot of the scientists are from those particular countries who decide not to accept the 1.5 degree Celsius report. So that was the statement. That was the statement I want to. You can't be selective when it comes to science. But I think it's common knowledge that small island developing states, not only they're at the front line, but for the Pacific, it's an existential issue. It will impact on them, and some of them will even not exist as sovereign states. But I think the most important thing to here, and I'm very grateful to our youth, is that science and politics are both sides of the same coin. As I just said, the scientists can say all the right things. And if the political leaders are not prepared to listen, then nobody is going to take that seriously. Reference was made to the US has decided to rejoin the Paris Agreement. That was a political decision, but it's also backed by science. So that is, I think for us, this movement, it's not going to stop. Why? Because I think there's a lot of buy-in, and there are many other countries joining. But I think it's really important for us to continue to remember that that science and politics have to go together. And I know my unsolicited advice to our youth is that advocacy, it's very important. But at the end of the day too, you can say all the right things, just as Seeds have been saying that we are at the front line, we are vulnerable, until we turn blue in the face and nobody listens. They say you are speaking from a high moral ground, and that's it. So the challenge to MC and also to Lita, keep on keeping on. But importantly, don't underestimate the fact that at the end of the day, you are a voter. For those who are eligible to vote, you are an important voting constituency. Don't underestimate that, because then we can say all the right things, but the national governments have their own agenda, and if they don't want to listen to science, they will just ignore it. And I think that the point was raised by our youth representatives. They can say all the right things when they deliver their statements, their national statements. Then when it comes to the actual negotiation, they will be putting up all sorts of obstacles so that science is gets sidelined and gets buried down. So for me, why did we decide? We wanted to make that statement. We believe in science, but more importantly, we also believe in the importance of leadership. And for the youth, you're not doing it because you are future leaders. No, you are doing it because you are leaders now.
Yeah.
You have every right to demand that, and you can be a leader in your own right. But more importantly, walk the talk. Let's not be advocates simply because it's fashionable to do that. We get the limelight, we get interviewed, and then we go back to our old positions. Do it because you are already a leader in your own right, and you demonstrate it by what you do in your own community, in your own house, in your own, whether it's in a school, a church, or in your country. So I think we are all in this together. And for me, I know that I'm not directly responding to Matt's question, but I think those were the statements I want to make. We are in this together. Science is important, but it can't go alone. Science has to go with the political will. And we have a way to ensure that the political will respects science. Because at the end of the day, you and I can vote, and your parents can vote too. If you're not yet reached the age where you can vote, your parents, your other colleagues. So very empowering and very proud to be part of this conversation, because I think we've planted a seed, it's grown, it's not going to be, so let's continue watering it. But I think it's also important for us to be very frank and don't raise expectations unnecessarily. Let's be realistic in what we can achieve. And just as Nick has shared with us, even Samoa, we are able to utilize technology to our full advantage. But more importantly, we need partners. Partners with the resources in terms of money. We have the sunlight, and people who have faith and trust in what we're trying to do. So this is not only a teamwork, this is a movement, and it's great to be part of this movement. So youth,
keep on, keep it on.
on.
I love it. No, and look, and Ambassador, when you talk about the two sides of the same coin in dealing with the climate crisis, really being climate action and climate solutions, Samoa has led in both of these regards, from the Science Not Silence campaign, really focusing on climate action and mobilizing the world to unite behind the 1.5 degree science. And then climate solutions, its partnership with Grid Market and IRP, it shows that it's not just the right thing to do to pursue these ambitious climate goals, because it's what's required to address the crisis, but as Grid Market has demonstrated, it's the smart thing to do. It is not just integrating renewable energy, it's making infrastructure more resilient. And in Samoa's case, I know the partnership is going to be dropping the cost of energy nearly in half. And so it's exciting to see as the technology develops and the political will grows for more and more countries to follow your lead. So look, with that, we're at the end of our Unite Behind the Science Forum. I would like to thank the organizers at the United Nations High-Level Dialogue of Energy for agreeing to host us for this official side event. Of course, I want to thank my friends for joining, Ambassador Feturi from the Independent State of Samoa, Nick Davis from Grid Market, Senna from the SDG 7 Youth Constituency, and of course my co-hosts, co-moderators, and dear friends, Hita Lakani and Marie Claire Graff from YOUNGO. Thank you all for being here, and for those who are interested in finding ways to build upon Samoa's success, I encourage you to go to islandresilience.com and sign up to be a part of this movement. Thank you all for joining us, and looking forward to building upon our success around the world. Take care.
Thank you.